Hey, Sens fans, welcome to Season 5, Episode 20 of the Senstennial Podcast. We have the full crew on board tonight. Love that. And we are going to talk about some positive stuff in Sensland. I know crazy miracle stuff, but we're looking forward to talking about a couple of back-to-back wins this past weekend and talking about some improved play from some of the guys out there. You can definitely see that some of them are playing better than they have in the past, and we're going to touch on some of those guys. And then we have a couple of questions that were posed to us by the good old listeners and viewers here on YouTube and Spotify. So hang tight. We're going to get to all of those. But first, let's start things off with Ottawa's away game in New Jersey on Saturday. They roll into town. New Jersey's one of those teams who's in the hunt for a wild card spot, having a disappointing season compared to last year. They've fired Lindy Ruff. Travis Green's taken over as head coach, and looks like Mark Ruffalo. I know that was brought up on Twitter. Very true. And he kind of does.
I wholeheartedly disagree with
from
that.
an angle.
I think Mark Ruffalo is a handsome man. Travis Green is not at all.
I feel like Travis Green is kind of like your Wish.com version of Mark Ruffalo.
Okay. All right.
We'll settle on that for now. But anyway, so
we can circle back to this later.
We'll circle back to it. Yeah, it's a very.
This is the Nick Foligno debate from years ago. That's when I've never vehemently disagreed with Bennett on something more.
If anybody needs a reference to that, you got to watch our 100 episodes video. You'll fully understand if you watch that, which is on our homepage on YouTube. But anyway, so Bennett, let's kick it off to you. Sens go into town in Jersey. They kick the Devils to the curb by a score of 5-2. What did you think about that game?
How about you kick it to me for the Edmonton game, because I did not watch the New Jersey game.
Wow, so disappointing. All right, Matt. Wow. I love the honesty. That's what we do.
We're in the dog days of the Ottawa Senators season, because we're losing, and I too was like Bennett, and didn't watch it.
82 games is way too many. It is so many games.
I also know that Bennett,
even if we're winning.
This is Bennett's rookie season as a father, so I can also appreciate that his give a shit a meter is a lot lower than in past seasons.
It's also true.
Yeah, especially when you can't buy a damn save. But we have gotten some saves recently, fellas.
What?
We've gotten above 900 goaltending in the last 2 games from the same guy, Jonas Korpisalo. It's tough to expect that from that guy, but he's been pretty good. And in the New Jersey game, it seemed like he was making some pretty consistent saves. Also helped by it. I looked at the score sheet, and it just seemed like the big guns were all over that game. You had Tkachuk, you had Chabot, you had Stützle, you had Batherson. And then you have rookie sensation Angus Beef Boy Crookshanks. With such a nice goal.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it was long overdue for him to get an extended look on the Sens, and he's shown out the last couple of games.
Oh yeah, I agree. He's looked mighty fine, and he snipes that puck. And I know a lot of people have been calling for Crookshank to have received a call up earlier than he has this season, and I can appreciate that. I think when you look at it, Belleville is really close to the playoff picture, and they probably were looking to make a playoff berth. The only time Belleville's made the playoffs, they got swept out by Rochester. So I think they're looking to actually try to get into the playoffs, get some experience for a couple of the guys who have been down there for maybe a couple of seasons. And I for sure would like to see Crookshank and guys like Clevin, Ostapchuk, who also looked good in the NHL when he was here. I would like all 3 of those guys, because they're the prospects that I think have either the most pedigree, or at least are the highest in Ottawa's pipeline right now in terms of expectations. I'd just like to see them get some playoff experience, because it's a whole different ball game, even in the AHL, compared to the regular season. So like what I saw from him, he looked good again against the Oilers, and And that was another shocking game. And Bennett, if you want to talk about the Edmonton game, the Sens, they come out, they survive. They are down 3-1. They tie the game. And then in the third period, they take the lead with a few minutes to go and end up winning with a 5-3 win. Kelly gets the empty netter. And both of you guys were actually in attendance for that. And so, yeah, what was your boots on the ground kind of scouting report of that game?
Yeah, that was some vintage rope-a-dope for those of you who are familiar with Muhammad Ali's famous strategy. The Sens weathered the storm. They took their punches, they got in the corner and they put up their hands and they did some serious defending. And then when they punched, they freaking punched. Because I mean the Senators, it was a really interesting game. Like I was like watching parts with like my eyes like partially like closed because I was like absolutely convinced that we were gonna start getting like torn into. But no, like we pulled it out. We Corpusalo, credit where it's due, like stood on his head. He had a 917 save percentage. He made some really quality saves throughout against some very good opportunities. The Sens had 16 shots and scored 5 goals, and Edmonton had 36 and only scored 3. Normally, the way things have been going the last couple of months is it's the opposite has been true. The Sens have been putting up a ton of shots and not getting anything. So today they were taking their chances and probably, we were against Edmonton's backup and that probably had something to do with it. But I saw there were some really good performances up there. Drake Batherson was absolutely flying yesterday. He is looking so good now in the back half of the season. He had 2 beautiful primary assists on Chychrun's goals, the tying goal in the first and the go-ahead goal in the third. Both of them beautiful saucer passes across the slot, so that was great. He had a really active stick. I saw him strip the puck off McDavid at one point and prevent an odd man rush. So great to see sort of some of its defensive game coming back to him too. And I thought Chychrun looked really good. Timmy had one of those nights where you don't really notice him and he somehow ends up with 3 points. It was just
vintage Tim Stützle.
That's like the Tim Stützle special is like scores like a random goal on like an odd man rush and then picks up 2 secondary assists and like has 3 points and isn't even like one of the 3 stars because like other people had better games, but it's like
guy was just out there vibing and still putting up points. Like that's exactly what you could probably go to a podcast from last March and hear the exact same spiel from us because that's what he does. Just super consistent, puts up points, but I couldn't agree more, Bennett.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll wrap it up with just saying that it was really nice to beat Edmonton, especially on home ice. I feel like I haven't seen us beat Edmonton in a long time. We were surrounded by obnoxious Oilers fans who finally shut up after the third period when they realized that the game was slipping away from them and there was nothing they could do about it. And when Kelly scored that empty net goal, it sent everyone in our section packing, and you love to see it.
And the people in your section were predominantly Oilers fans. We should specify.
Yes. Yeah.
It was just a draft enthusiast for the Ottawa Senators.
No, that's awesome though. I was disappointed that I couldn't go, but a family thing came up semi last minute, and I was like, oh, but when you haven't seen your family in a while, it is what it is. But celebrating at one of my family members' homes, I was like, oh, the Sens are down 3-1. Then I saw they tie 3-3, and I was like, oh, sick. Okay. Managed to make it home for like the latter half of the third period and saw the go ahead from Chychrun, which was almost identical to his first goal that game, actually.
Those goals were almost like basically the same goal.
that was
crazy.
The best I've seen the power play look all season. And I leaned over to my brother-in-law and was like, hey, the Sens power play is really bad. So like, I wouldn't expect much. There's an Oilers fan behind me and he was complaining about that first penalty call on Brady being interfered with, and he's like,
Mhm.
that's a dive. And it's like, well, if he made contact with him and he actually didn't have the puck, so that's a penalty. But hey, fit your narrative.
Yeah.
And then they scored in like 12 seconds.
Yeah.
And Devin was like, hey, yeah, well, clearly that you were wrong. And I said, that doesn't happen much. We don't score a lot of power play goals. And then we did 2 more. But I think the thing to talk about with that game was it was shades of the pesky Sens, a team that just weathers the storm, and then strikes when the iron's hot, because Edmonton was all over them. I probably thought in the third period, up until before we got that power play, we probably had 40 seconds of possession the
Oh my
entirety
God.
of the third period. It was the saddest form of hockey I've ever seen them play. And Edmonton was just putting on a clinic. And like, if I was an Oilers fan, I'd be pissed off that they lost. I would have pulled Pickard after the third goal. And he's been rock steady for them. Like, he had a .917 save percentage going into that game, and then just got absolutely cooked. But that was a great win because we got good goaltending, and the forwards are sorry, not the forwards. Like, the entire team was scoring when it mattered, and they made it happen. So thank God.
Yeah. And on that note, I think that we should talk about some of the guys, and we could start with defenders if you want, who have really taken strides in improving their game. And I know one I wanted to talk about was Thomas Chabot. I think prior to his injury, I was like, oh man, like, he's still got a handful of years at an $8 million cap hit. His no trade clause comes into effect this summer. I was just, I don't know. I was almost like, can the Sens manage to move this guy out and use that money, like allocate it to improving their defensive core? But he has really come alive since returning from his injury. He is playing some of the best defensive hockey, both eye test and analytically, that I've seen him play in quite some time. He's chipping in on offense just by scoring goals himself, which seems to have become kind of like a rarity
Yeah.
for him in the last couple of years. But
Yeah.
now he's scoring. He must feel confident about his play. He's getting assists, and yeah, it's just like all around he's really improved. So I don't know if you guys share similar thoughts, but to me it's like, okay, that's the guy that when Ottawa gave the long-term contract to Thomas Chabot at big money, that's the defenseman they envisioned.
I've been very much on the Thomas Chabot is him train, and he's just been plagued with injuries, bad coaching, and having a coach that is defensive minded, that lets him play his game to an extent without lacking on the finer details, that will benefit him. And I really believe that Jacques Martin was going to do wonders for his game, and clearly it has. I love seeing him put up points. When Thomas Chabot is playing well, the team plays well. And I firmly believe that he can continue to do this because he's an excellent defender. And I love it. It's great. He's a really good player, and when he's playing really well, good things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I already gave him a partial shout out, but I just want to heap a little bit more praise on Jake Batherson. I mean, like, he had, despite setting career highs in points and goals last season, I think last season a lot of us were disappointed with his play. And despite the fact that he was, sort of like scoring and doing things, and I think his plus minus was really terrible, one of the worst in the league. And he was a defensive liability. He wasn't winning a lot of puck battles. Like, he seemed to just be getting out-muscled and pushed off the puck, like, constantly. And like I was saying, like, in the Edmonton game, like, you could see he was playing with so much more confidence. He was, winning battles. He was, like, breaking up plays. He was, getting first two, those loose pucks. And I think just like little things like that make such a difference. And, even if he'll probably end up getting pretty much the same amount of points this season as he did last year, give or take a couple. So not like a significant change there. He's already passed his goals total, so he could push for 30. I think it'll be a little tight at this stage, but he could crack it. But even if he doesn't, I think like we've seen a lot of the intangibles moving in the right direction, and I think that he could be poised for an even stronger season next year.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's looked great. And I think if you want to have a good power play, you need Drake Batherson on his game. When he is passing like he does, when he shoots like he can, like he is a great player. So when you have him firing on all cylinders, that just makes your team so much better. And like you said, you can see that in the last couple of weeks, Batherson has been hot. And the Sens have benefited from that. And that was on full display against the Oilers with a couple of really silky, smooth passes that he got over to Chikrin for a couple of nice goals. So definitely shout out to him. I think one of the other guys that I'd love to give a shout out to, and I think it's kind of one of those guys who's, low key fight in the trenches type of guys, but you can tell Jacques Martin really likes him, and that's Parker Kelly. Parker Kelly has become one of the best defensive forwards on the team, which is nuts. He has become one of their best penalty killers. Again, against the Oilers early in the third. Technically, they weren't on the penalty kill, but they were hemmed in their zone for several minutes. And it was Parker Kelly who ended up playing hero and getting the puck out of the zone. And he got a huge applause from the crowd. And I think like that just kind of has been his season, is nothing super flashy. He's not going to put a ton of points on the board, although he is having a much better offensive season this year than he did last year. But you're never expecting a ton of points from him. He's a guy who in the preseason, people were like, this guy sucks. Get him off the team. Why is he even in the NHL? And he has really changed people's minds and has become your, prototypical fourth line energy penalty kill guy. And guy who you can throw on the ice in the dying minutes and know that he'll give you a good chance to hang on to the lead. And I think that's crazy. Like it's great. And I'm just really happy for him. He's only 24. So if he keeps this up, Sens could just kind of have like a long-term guy they give some short-term contracts at cheap money for, and he can keep puttering doing his thing. But obviously it's about consistency and whether he can do this more than one season. But under Jacques Martin, I think he's really flourished. So I wanted to give him kind of a little shout out there.
Yeah, well deserved.
Absolutely. And having a good fourth line is how you win championships. And I think like he can definitely be a part of that. And he's way more effective than a guy like Dominique Kubalik. And last night, like Kubalik had so many opportunities to do something and was like, the guy has no confidence whatsoever. And that sucks, obviously, but he's going in on a 3-on-1 and he's got a lethal shot when he can get it off. And he was just holding it and then passed it off. And it was a bad pass. And I'm just like, dude, just try to play your game at least. But I look at the big guys and, everybody's kind of showing up and that's really good to see. And I'm loving the Chabot Brandstrom pair. It's hard not to love it. And who knows if this sort of changes any perception of if Brandstrom stays. I'd obviously love that for him, especially because, as we noted, like Chabot is playing some really good hockey right now. And I think some of that needs to be attributed to a solid partner in Erik Brandstrom.
Yeah, and he was a guy who, when he came over from Vegas, he could play both sides. He actually preferred playing right side, but just because of how the Sens had things laid out, they wanted him on the left because of his handedness. DJ Smith obviously really wanted left hands on the left side, right on the right side. But yeah, so it's nice. And I agree that pairing has a lot of lethality because Brandstrom's just really good at transitioning the puck and, keeping players to the outside. I don't know if you guys sometimes try to like pay attention to one player on a shift. But when I was in the building, I don't know, one of the games last week that I think I wanted to forget about because it was bad. But there was a play where like a forward was rushing into the zone, and Brandstrom back checked and was able to use his stick and his speed to keep the player to the outside, and the player ended up having to go all the way to the corner, and it got tied up, and there was like a bit of a board battle, and Ottawa was able to take the puck and move it out of the zone and go back the other way. But stuff like that, if you can keep the opposing forwards to the outside, have an active stick, as they call it, and just play gap control. That's really like what you want in a defenseman. The goalie should ideally handle all the shots that come outside of that like center ice slot area. So anyway, I agree. He's played well. And I'm sure there are a few other players that we could give shout outs to for their recent play, but I do want to get to a couple questions that were submitted to other Matt for tonight's show. And the first one is, what do you think makes Ottawa a playoff team next year? And Matt, because you were past these questions, I'm going to let you take first stab because you've had more time to think about it.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the obvious answer. And what would have made Ottawa a playoff team this year is league average goaltending. When the Senators got above 900 save percentage, I believe the stat was like they were 18-3-1. That's a lot of games where they didn't get 900 save percentage. Korpisalo, when he has an above 900 save percentage, he was, I think it was in Ian Mendez's article, he was 16-2-1. And it's just, this is a playoff team if they just get, like, I don't even want to say good, because good's the wrong word, like just fine goaltending. And oh my gosh, how many times have we said this on this podcast? It's like, just mix in a save every now and then. Give us a game where the defense is only letting outside shots, and they're making saves. Like, I don't obviously want Korpisalo to make those beautiful scorpion saves. I just like routine saves, and that's what gets us into the playoffs next year, in my opinion, is goaltending that's sitting around 907 to 912. Because if we can do that, this team has the makings to make some noise somewhere, because they've got a really good core, and it's just too bad that there were a lot of factors that went into the season playing out like it did this year. But the one thing that should have been done on the ice is make a couple more saves.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting actually looking at the back-to-back games this weekend. Korpisalo started both of them. So I don't know if that says something about Jacques Martin's faith in Anton Forsberg, but the last two starts that Forsberg's had, he's gotten absolutely just peppered. Allowed a lot of goals. And not that Korpisalo is like the shining beacon, but you can tell that when you put Korpisalo in net lately, the Sens have more of a chance at actually winning a game. And so it'll be interesting to see if the Ottawa Senators go out and Steve Staios looks at free agency and tries to find a guy who's, performed really well in like a Laurent Boissois or something like that, maybe a Calvin Picard, and just try and pick up one of these guys. And I don't know what they would do with Forsberg, but or if they go out and try to catch a big fish like Allmark, if he is on the market or something like that. It'll be interesting to see what they do there. But yeah, Bennett, how about you? Are you going to say goaltending as well, or do you have something else on the mind?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is that I don't think anything makes the Sens a playoff team next year. I think that there's too much, the gap is too wide. There's too much that would need to change in the span of a short period of time for the Sens to take that leap. This isn't a team that, missed the playoffs 1 year and it's just how do we get back there? It's like we've never been there with this group. We don't have a history of being a playoff team. I think if you look at some of these Senators teams the last couple of seasons, and you look at them in like a vacuum and you control for everything and you say, yeah, I could see this team making the playoffs, but just like functionally, practically, it just hasn't been the case. I think you're counting on too many stars to align in a way that's just not realistic for how a typical NHL season works. You're expecting guys in that who've never put up a consistent season in their lives to be consistent. That's not a winning strategy. You're expecting guys to take large leaps in their individual development all at the same time. Again, like, doesn't usually work that way. There's ups and downs. Like, we all confidently came into this season thinking that Timmy, who'd scored 39 goals and had 90 points, would be a 100-point player this year. But that's not how development curves work. Even if you're an elite player like Tim Stützle is, most people don't just trend upwards every single year. There's a little bit of up and down as they're finding their feet in the league, and that's completely normal. Guys like McKinnon had that same kind of development curve. It's only freaks of nature like McDavid and Crosby that come in and just run the league from day one and never look back. So again, the point is that I think that, this team has had a hard time finding depth, especially on the wing. Our center depth is pretty good
when healthy.
But that's also not often the case, with Norris missing significant time in most of the last few seasons and not being very effective when he is here. So I think that this team is not constructed to be a contender. I think we can say that pretty clearly based on the results of the last few years. I think that they haven't really shown any evidence that they're a playoff team. I think that your record, as Elliot Friedman often says, you are what your record says you are. And this Senators team have never been a playoff team. So to think that they'll just be one next season with one or two small changes is, I think, a little naive. So all of this to say is, like, they need better goaltending, they need better defense, they need better forward depth, particularly on the wing. They need better coaching, they need better scouting, and they need guys to miss less time with injury. And that's just way too many stars to align all at once. I think it can fix maybe one or two of those problems each off season, but it's still going to take us a couple of years to get there.
Yeah, that's fair. And I guess my answer would be similar along the lines of, like, I do think we need a few pieces, but if I could argue for one, and I'll basically take one of the points you mentioned with forward depth, I think investing your money smart rather than going for the biggest name free agents, going for smart free agents. So for example, this summer, Teuvo Teravainen for the Carolina Hurricanes, he's a free agent. He's a guy who's received Selke votes in each of the last couple of seasons. He plays left wing. He's not a huge guy. He doesn't put up a plethora of points, but he's a guy who wouldn't have to. You could put him on the wing, either playing with, Stützle, or he could play on your second line, maybe with Pinto if Norris isn't ready to go next season, or if Norris is playing on the third line just because of, like, cautionary decisions from the team. He's like turning 30 before next season, so that's kind of maybe one thing where it's like, well, does he want like a 7-year deal? Because then there's maybe some risk. But he's a guy who's not going to ask for the top end, like $8 million plus like some of the other big name free agents. And I find that guys who put up points, even if not as many, and are solid defensively, they seem to not get as much money in free agency. They're like undervalued. Guys like Philip Deneau, I know he was traded to LA and signed there, but again, he signed a very team-friendly contract, and he's very good defensively. So a guy like that, I think, really helps you up front, where I think you have guys like Brady Tkachuk, who has historically never been great defensively. Claude Giroux's not going to be here forever. If he signs past next season, sure, but I don't know how long he'll be a top 6 forward. And if he decides to leave after next year, or if the Sens start to have a disappointing season, he's a guy who's going to be likely moved for assets. So bringing in someone who can help your top 6 for now, but also for the next handful of years, and has some leadership experience, probably a good idea. And then, there's other holes to fill in, but I know I've been oddly specific with this one, but I just think bringing in a top six forward, Teuvo Teravainen was just the one that comes to mind. Just bring someone who has experience, is a defensive presence, veteran, has been to a lot of playoff Eastern Conference finals. Sadly, hasn't made a Stanley Cup final, but he's a guy who, you know, has had so much experience that I think you bring him in, and that helps your top six immensely. So, yeah, I think there's other holes that you want to fill. You know, when Vancouver signed Pius Suter past summer, I really liked him, and he's a guy who's really thrived in death role for Vancouver. So it's like using the money you have and the cap space you have and just investing it in a smart way rather than just always going for like big fish or the flashiest name. Go for someone who improves the roster in a way where there will actually be like tangible evidence of that on the ice, versus just like star power in name alone. And that's not to say a guy like Tarasenko didn't help the Sens this year, but it's one of those situations where he was a guy who's playing on like the third line for almost half the season under DJ Smith. And so it was a guy who didn't fit the makeup of the roster in the coach's eyes. But the GM saw shiny name, like, let's bring this guy in. And liked Tarasenko's time here, but it just kind of like as an example that is in everyone's recent memory, that's kind of something that I'm talking about. So basically just finding the right peg for the right hole.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, you know, smaller roster injections more than anything. Not name chasing. And improving that right side. Going out and getting a legit top four right shot defenseman would be huge for this team. You also need to figure out your goaltending. I think you can't run it back with these two guys. You have to get rid of at least one of them. You look at free agency, you look at who's been successful as a tandem goalie: Laurent Brossoit, Alex Nedeljkovic, Anthony Stolarz. Like, those are some names that come up. And then, you know, filling that top six spot, also filling our coaching role. And one final thing, Teravainen does have a cup.
I know. I actually just
Yeah.
realized that he won it in his rookie season. So we're just going to pretend that I said that.
But speaking of coaching, I think it's obviously important to kind of touch on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think on the top of my list anyway is Craig Berube. I have seen some people who are like, not so sure about that. But he's a guy who I went and read some articles from people who wrote blogs or, you know, articles of his time in St. Louis. And a lot of people were actually upset that he was fired. They felt that Doug Armstrong didn't give Craig Berube enough defensive power to really work with. And he's a guy who really preaches a 5-team defensive style, you know, making sure the centers are involved, but making sure the wingers are actually playing defense, not cheating, leaving the zone early, stuff like that. And he's also a coach who tries to not coach everyone with the same, like in the same way. He approaches everyone as their own individual. Everyone has a unique way that they like to be coached, and that's how he approaches it. And I think that is very healthy. And with a Sens team that has had some really unhealthy and painful habits, bringing in a guy who really likes to instill a defense first mindset, and a mindset where it's like not everyone is just, you know, the same old hockey player. Like, everyone is going to have a certain thing that makes them tick. What is that thing that makes them tick? How can we get them, you know, feeling great so that they can perform their best? I think that, at least for me, he's on top of my list. But I don't know, Bennett, have you done much, you know, digging or taking any interest in some of the free agent coaches out there, or what's on your mind there?
I mean, you see all of the names that get listed, and Berube is on a lot of those lists, and Dean Evanson is on a lot of those lists. I think people, you know, would talk about Claude Julien, although I think that the organization hasn't really indicated that that's someone that they're interested in. It's possible that they've had discussions and he's happy with his scouting role and doesn't want to go back into the show, in which case, fair enough. We know that Martin is out of the running. He doesn't want to continue on after this year. Again, fair enough. He is like approximately 113 years old. So let him ride off into the sunset. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't really have a particular guy in mind. Like I think Berube is the guy that I lean towards the most, but I saw that, like I have Jordan Kyrou on my fantasy team, so I follow his career, a little bit more closely than the average, non-Senators player. And he seemed to be a guy who really was struggling with Berube by the end of it. And I feel like despite what you were saying about being a guy that coaches to everyone's style, I think he did not feel that he was being coached in a beneficial way. And, I just like, he's like a high skill guy, a young player. And it's just like, I'm a little worried. Like we have a lot of guys like that on our team. And what I don't want is like some old school knock some heads coach who's going to come in and just crater everybody's confidence. Like, yeah, like I do think that this team needs a kick in the ass. Like we all think that, but Martin has shown that there's like a way of doing that without being a dick about it. And I just think like it's like I'm not like a guy who craves that kind of like old school, like, like just like tough love sort of attitude from a coach. Like I'd really like somebody younger and more progressive. But that being said, like I also don't really want like a brand new hire, someone who's going to come in without any NHL coaching experience. So all of this is to say I haven't really made up my mind. And I know that's not a very good answer for you, but I think I would kick it back to what I was saying before. It's like I think that this isn't a quick fix and for the Senators. And I think that whether it's guys who are on the ice or guys behind the bench, if you try and seek short-term solutions here and try and, chase big names and make splashy moves to plug the holes and try and turn this team around, like that's what this team has been doing for 4 years now, and it's never worked yet, and it's not going to work. So I would say like be conservative and just try and like find people that can do the job and don't break the bank and don't cost you a lot of assets in terms of the on ice guys. And, just try and make those kind of like more like conservative changes year after year to slowly get you back up to where you were instead of just taking huge swings on guys and missing constantly, which is what the Sens have been doing recently.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think some of the guys that Ottawa has swung on too, it's like, all right, here's 1 year. And they have, a mediocre year and then they go somewhere else and they perform better. And I don't know, it's just like you're constantly shuffling the deck versus trying to find some consistency and stability. And I think that's an issue in and of itself. But staying on the topic of coaching, like you're right, there are some concerns with I think most coaching candidates. Like ideally you want someone who can come in and be everything you hope for. Realistically, you're probably going to find one or two flaws in any coach that's brought in, but you're trying to find the best fit possible. And I'm hoping that Steve Staios, the rest of the front office, and if Michael Andlauer gets himself involved, because he seems like a guy who really likes being involved in the hockey ops side of things, then maybe they do have a lot of discussions and they're very thorough and they find a coach. It seems like when Staios was last asked about it, he said that they had started discussions, but to me, it seems like it's something that's been on the back burner for them. So I don't know when those conversations will actually, make progress. I don't know if Jacques Martin, Daniel Alfredson are going to be involved in those interviews in any capacity, just based off of them being in the locker room and around the team so much this season, to see what kind of input or feedback they might have. But there's a lot of question marks for sure. And I'm with you. If there's a coaching candidate that we haven't talked about that is the one who makes the most sense for the Sens, I'm all for it. As long as everyone does their due diligence in the organization and they bring in the best fit that they think will get this team turned in the right direction. But I'll flip it over to you, Matt. And is there a coach that piques your interest more than another?
Well, I think speaking to the fact of when they're going to start this coaching hunt or what have you, it's going to be in the off season because that's when a lot more options are going to be available. I think obviously the top of my list is Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh. I really hope he does get fired. Because there are times where you can have a good coach, but a team underperforms and the messaging just starts getting lost. And, Bennett, to your point about, how this team is really far away, I think it's an important conversation to have. But one of the things that this team has not had is a legit, not Looney Tunes style coach. DJ Smith is not a good coach. And I doubt we ever see him become a head coach in this league ever again, because his lack of style, lack of structure, and lack of almost like taking responsibility for when his team is playing poorly. Like, it was a very Bush League coaching style here. And I feel like he didn't get the best out of the players that he had. And then you move on to a interim coach in Jacques Martin, who is never on the ice. He has his assistant coach do his thing, and that's that. I think once this team gets a legitimate coach in place, I think we can actually see some results. And ultimately, I want two things. And you need to have at least one to even be considered. You need to have coached more than 3 seasons in the NHL. And 2, if you have a cup, you're at the top of my list. So, and there are options out there, because the guys that can get the best out of their players have cups. It's too bad that, Claude Julien probably won't be considered, because I think he's the type of coach that would make this team just like super responsible and all that. But, he's had health scares too. So I don't think he's wanting to get back into coaching. So if Mike Sullivan was available, like, he's the dream, because he has the track record. He's got it all. And that's what you really want in a coach. Because despite the Sens being the Sens this year, I believe in the core of this roster. And if they can, if they get a goddamn coach who knows what he's doing, I think that can make a difference to take these players to the next level.
And I think that is the perfect note to leave the episode on. Some with optimism, some positivity. And I think it's nice to record a positive episode. I think there's been a lot of doom and gloom over the last couple months. And hey, it's totally justified. There's been a lot of frustration, myself included, apathy setting in for some, and upset and anger over other situations. And I don't blame Sens fans, however you choose to react to this season. But it's nice when there's a spark of positivity in an otherwise fairly depressing season. So, hey, let's hope for the best. Season's almost done. Go Sens, go, baby.